This is what we've been waiting for. Forget summoning demons, forget beating an admiral, and you know what, we'll even put Elbaf on hold for now. Because this is the Bartholomew Kuma flashback. And this is no ordinary story. Because this is a backdoor story entrance into God Valley. This could genuinely be another Odin scale flashback, because there's so much to cover. Kuma is a character who is so interwoven with so much One Piece world history. Even before we knew he was on God Valley 38 years ago at the time of the incident, this is just another thing to add to the Kuma pile. Before we get into everything though, this channel has been nominated for La Gala Pirata 2023 for Best International One Piece Content Creator. The voting takes place in phases, and I'd highly encourage you all to click the link in the description and vote for your favorite One Piece channel in this category. It doesn't have to be me, I won't be offended much, but there's a ton of other great people in the category, including Tekking, BDA Lore, and even Arta, the Library of Ohara. And the winner will receive this Golden Choo Choo Award, which, not gonna lie, I really want that dog. So go vote in La Gala Pirata, but for now, we have so much to talk about. Saint Saturn is massive. I definitely didn't get the impression that he was anywhere near this huge from the last chapter. He's a proper Diablo boss and everything, although I have to say that he's gotten a bit pissy all of a sudden. It's not something I've really realized until now, but we almost never see the elders express emotion. So it's really weird to see Saturn doing anything in a non-neutral manner. The one time I do recall elder emotion was when they ordered the eradication of Ohara. It seems like they really regretted needing to do that. But Saturn has gone full goblin, and I don't know if this is just a weird translation thing, we'll have to wait for the official to confirm, but he has a very interesting line about why is it that when humans are told not to do something, they do it anyway. Because if Saturn has chosen to use the word humans over, say, people, then that's him actively separating himself from humanity. Which, as a world noble, I guess he already does, but it's not the same, you know? When someone like St. Charles looks down on humans, that's just arrogance. Biologically, he's no better than any human, and in fact, he's probably objectively worse due to all of the inbreeding. But when Saturn says something like this, it makes me believe that he is something else entirely. And it's interesting that he allows anyone at all to see this form. Because if I was someone who genuinely believed in all of the justices and the good that the world government does for the world, then I'd probably be pretty put off by learning that my glorious leader is a literal demon. And there's lots of Marines looking at him in this chapter. I suppose they all have the appropriate rank. But as expected, Saturn took the hit from Bonnie on purpose. My personal theory is that perhaps Saturn has been an emotionless old demon for so long that he'll do anything just for the sensation of feeling something again. And I kinda get it. I mean, when's the last time that he would have gotten to leave the old folks home, stretch his spider legs a bit? Probably not in a very long time. So you may as well get penetrated while you have the opportunity. But there's not a whole lot of hope for salvation here at the moment. Luffy is down for now, Zoro is still fighting Lucci, and Sanji, I guess, tripped and fell or something, and now he's scraped his knee and in a bad mood. Being real though, it was pretty wow to see Sanji blown back by, I don't even know what to call this force. It could be advanced armament haki doing the projection effect, but the glowing eyes, those evil, sinister glowing eyes, would imply that it has something more to do with Saturn's innate demonic abilities. Maybe a literal and far less flamboyant death wink. Kizaru is awake but unable to move, and I think that our Lightman may have overestimated himself a bit here because, just saying, when Kaido got head-fisted, he kept on fighting. But it's pretty crazy to see an admiral in full-on Katakuri defeat position, although Oda has selected a very salacious angle to showcase this defeat with the open leg crotch shot. He's doing a lot better than Luffy though, who has reverted back to his black hair, which leads to one of my favorite moments in the chapter. Saturn goes to kill Luffy with his, what do you even call it? The spider poker? He does that, and so it's up to Frankie to save the day, and how does he do that? By punching Luffy out of the way. I love it. And there's a bit more Frankie hype here because Saturn acknowledges him, and Frankie even has a bit of his own joy boy moment because he's in a horrendous, hellish, and potentially hopeless situation right now, but he starts laughing at the whole ordeal, likely because of how proud he is that his captain Luffy demands the full attention of the world's toppest of leaders. Perhaps Frankie is the true joy boy. It's almost impossible to break his spirit, and he can stretch parts of himself, I suppose. A bit of a brutal transition here though, because Saturn has decided that Bonnie will be the first to die, and her method of execution is firing squad, as Saturn orders the Marines in the immediate vicinity to aim for her head. It's very ceremonial, and it's obvious that Saturn is doing this to make a point. If he wanted Bonnie dead by now, he could have done so himself with his head poppage. But this is a staged production intended for an audience of one man who is Stella. And Stella yells that no, Bonnie is just a child, don't do this bad thing to the child, again fueling the child Bonnie theory. And if this is true, then this moment, it does become even more more sickening, although maybe this is a mercy. Instead of killing Bonnie in some sort of grotesque demonic way, it's just gonna be a few quick shots to the head due to the childness. Although I do think that Saturn is enjoying this because he does do a bit of a gloat when Bonnie says that Saturn killed Kuma. After that, Saturn's all like, "Oh yeah, Kuma, I remember him." And then he proceeds to recount all of the terrible things that happened to Kuma, like a lovely memory of times gone by. Either way, this would be a real good moment for Kuma to show up. And on this rather dramatic some note, we cut to a flashback that we've been waiting for approximately 15 years. Ever since Kuma first appeared on Sabadi and saved the Straw Hats, we've known that his story was incoming. And now that it's finally here, I don't know how prepared I am for it. Child Kuma is painfully adorable. In all forms, like the baby Kuma is almost surreal to see this baby with this fulsome chiseled chin. And there's also a really cool panel where you can see the sheer scale of Kuma, because as a child, he's sitting next to a fully grown adult, and Kuma is already both taller as well as significantly wider than said adult. Big reveal now though, we have the name of Kuma's mysterious race, which is called the Buccaneer race, which is probably a very familiar word for English, French, or Spanish speakers. And I guess a buccaneer these days is often used as a synonym for pirate, and I guess it's because it kind of was, but not really. It's complicated. They're very interesting because buccaneers were pirates, but not pirates, and they were also privateers, but not privateers. Much like Kuma himself, who is a bit of everything, even a warlord, which of course takes inspiration from the privateer system. Also, if you look at the Wikipedia page for buccaneers, you are greeted by a portrait of a man who I'm going to go ahead and say was probably the visual inspiration for the original Shanks design. But as for buccaneers in One Piece, they appear to be a mix of humans and giants, and I suppose that Kuma would only be half buccaneer because his mother wasn't, but even then the dude became massive. And Kuma's whole situation is, oh look, heartbreaking isn't a strong enough word, so let's think of something else. Gut-wrenching, harrowing, ball-twisting. It's all of them. It's all of those things at the same time. You see him endure all of this torture, but when he's with his family, they smile and pretend that everything's okay. A facade that doesn't really crack until Kuma's mother dies, and we get one of the most difficult panels that I have ever had to look at in One Piece. Sometimes I call Eiichiro Oda a bit of a sadist, because he has absolutely mastered the depiction of pain. He can rip your heart out with a single facial expression. And we are ever so lucky that his main focus is on creating a fun, happy story with only the occasional bit of pain. But Kuma's father is consistently lying to keep his son's spirits up, even doing the little Nika dance, and then bam, shot in the head, which is the exact opposite of the hope it was that he was trying to instill. So the first time that Kuma hears the name Nika is also his greatest moment of despair. Well, greatest moment of despair to date. There is certainly more to come. This is only the start of the flashback. And the start of the flashback is usually when we get the lighter material. This is the lighter material. It's only going to get worse from here. It's interesting though, because in doing this, the world nobles have solidified that Kuma's last image of his father was performing the sun god dance and humming the drum beat. So they've actively reinforced Kuma's inherited will here, and as always, the world nobles continue to breed their own problems, which I think is perfectly encapsulated by the idea that the Nika name is only known by those in the worst possible positions within the world government, being slaves and prisoners, and also by the races that the world government seems to treat the harshest, the Lunarians and the Buccaneers. New question though, did Kuma know that Luffy ate the Nika Nika no Mi when he decided to help him? It's entirely possible that he did because Vegapunk knew about it, and maybe he even heard, a little slight drum of liberation with his enhanced cyborgian ears. Hence why he went to the extreme of dedicating his body to protecting the Thousand Sunny for 2 years. But it's also pretty clear that from here, Bonnie is going to be a long-time ally of the crew. I've even heard calls of Bonnie for Straw Hat, and look, I don't know if things will quite go that far, but it's possible because she now seems to have an inherited will that is directly linked to Nika. It would be fulfilling her father's legacy to see Luffy bring about the dawn of the world. But mate, we've got a lot to cover here. Unless Oda really, and I mean really, blasts through the story, we could be spending most of the rest of the year in this flashback. Realistically, there aren't that many chapters left in 2023. I think we're looking at 5 or 6 at most. And there's so much to cover with Kuma because he was evidently born into a regular family in the Sorbet Kingdom. So we need to know how he eventually goes back, becomes king, as well as earns his tyrant epithet, plus everything with the Revolutionary Army, Vegapunk, Bonnie, and even some potential world government stuff. He's one of those characters who has a finger in every pie, which is just as intriguing as it is unhygienic. The wildest part of all of this to me though is that we've also also somehow stumbled our way into a God Valley flashback. Oda makes us think, now don't worry guys, this is going to be a Kuma-centric flashback. But what do you know, Kuma, he just happened to be there at the time of the God Valley incident. Good storytelling story, man. I really like the subversion of the island because most ideas surrounding God Valley have assumed that it was some sort of sacred ground of the world nobles due to the name, and I like that it's the exact opposite, and they chose God Valley because how dare it dare to even take their name. And I guess what we have going on here is something of a hunting tournament, hunting natives of God Valley and select slaves. And look, as someone who worked in theater and live events, what they're doing here sounds like a logistical nightmare. Commandeering a whole nation, that's the easy part, but now they have to figure out food, accommodation, amenities, and entertainment for the world nobles who have these absurd standards of living. This is a fire festival waiting to happen. We do also confirm that God Valley is/was in West Blue, another subversion because it's generally been assumed that God Valley was either in the Grand Line or the New World, because it would be a lot easier to make an island disappear in those sections of the world. Erasing a whole island in West Blue, that is next level. I know they're not well government affiliated, but the Blues, they're comparatively quiet towns. When something happens to your neighbor in a quiet blue, then word spreads quickly. And if your neighbor were to say host a fight between the future Pirate King, the hero of the Marines, and the greatest threat that the planet has ever known, it's going to be quite the task to cover that up. And also West Blue is where O'Hara is/was/is, it still kind of exists. And West Blue is also noted as a location where Shanks was born, so maybe we'll actually see him be born in this flashback. Either way, I suppose what we can gather from this is that assumed father Figurland Garling had intercourse approximately 9 months ago from when this image happened. Speaking of, let's get into Garling. I was not expecting him to be so pretty. When I thought of a young Garling, I basically just pictured Shanks with the Garling hairstyle. Being real here though, Garling looks more like Robin than he does Shanks, especially because he has that specifically sculpted double parallel line Robin nose. Which reminds me, Oda once drew Robin as a man, and if you switch the hairstyles, this is just 100% Garling. I guess Shanks must have gotten his looks from his mother. Although as always, I should give the disclaimer that it's not confirmed that Garling is Shanks' father. He could be an uncle or a cousin, a brother maybe? Not a brother. Maybe a brother? Nah, not a brother. But they are both members of the Figurland family. And Garling has all of the world noble women fawning over him, so he's like an even more obnoxious Cavendish. I loved his introduction panel, but it did highlight one minor thing that does tend to annoy me about One Piece, which is that whenever Oda draws swords, they often end up looking really weird. He doesn't really use straight lines, so they often have this sort of jelly effect happening. It's like he does everything by eye and just settles for the first line that comes out and rolls with it. Very minor thing, and speaking of minors, young Emporio Ivankov was the biggest surprise of the chapter. Even though Ivankov and Kuma are closely connected, I wasn't expecting them to go as far back as childhood. I love the young Eva design. The, what should we call it? The Speedo chic. It reminds me a lot of a young Frankie, which I think was very much done on purpose, especially since both of them are given very open, loud, and quote, perverse personalities. Perverse not necessarily meaning the same thing it does in English. The Japanese word used is hentai, which I'm sure you all know the meaning of. However, hentai also means transform, so that's why it commonly comes up for both Frankie and Ivankov. What a phenomenal meeting though. Ivankov is also a bit of a joy boy in his own way, because this is twice now that a character has been at their lowest and has been saved by Ivankov. Luffy and Kuma both found this face in their respective hells. And it also recontextualizes Ivankov seeing Kuma at Marineford. He says, "You creep, just because they made you a warlord doesn't mean you can fire your laser at an old friend." Turns out, not just old friends, very old friends. Almost 4 decades of knowing each other. And to make matters significantly worse, this is also where Ivankov learns that Kuma is no more. Doflamingo cheerfully informs Ivankov that Kuma is already dead. And this is one of those exchanges that I would say you don't really feel because of all of the hidden history. But stuff like this is gonna hit a lot harder once this flashback is over. In fact, it already does. We also have a new character being Ginny, and I'm in 2 minds about her. The one thing I've resigned myself to is that she is not surviving this flashback. Whenever a completely new character comes up in a flashback who we've never met in the modern day, it's usually pretty safe to assume they're dead. The big question for me is exactly when does Ginny die? Originally I thought, oh, she's gonna be a victim of the God Valley incident, tragedy, But immediately after that, the obvious hit me. Ginny is Bonnie's mother, right? Like, she has to be. They're visually very similar, but Ginny's voracious introduction and the big chunk of meat is definitely evoking Bonnie's hunger. And also less obviously in English, there's the name. Ginny and Bonnie are much more different in English than they are in Japanese, because both end in the katakana ni, as does the Dowager Queen Connie. I've also seen people jumping on the inexplicable bandwagon that Ginny is Luffy's mother, and I think that this is probably not the case because Ivankov didn't even know that Dragon had a son. He always suspected that Dragon had a family in East Blue because that's always the direction he'd face, and I think that would be much more difficult to hide if Luffy's mother was Ivankov's sister. And if Ginny is Ivankov's sister, does that make Ivankov Bonnie's uncle, or even aunt, depending on how Ivankov is feeling at the time? As another visual note, Ginny also seems to have the same sort of hairstyle as Atlas, which isn't particularly common, so I think it's worth pointing out, just in case Ginny served as a bit of aesthetic inspiration for one of the satellites. And really, if you gave Ginny a buccaneer body, Atlas is how she'd end up looking. So if I had to guess, I would say that Ginny ends up escaping and procreating with Kuma, and that there's going to be a secondary, perhaps even tertiary layer of tragedy to this flashback after God Valley. But for now, this could be our first proper look at Rocksteady Zebek. It also opens up room for appearances from Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido, Stussy, Shiki, and so many others. We could even potentially see how God Valley was erased. And with that in mind, it's one of the absolute cruelest things that a fictional pirate author could have done to leave us with a break next week. Outrageous behavior by Eiichiro Oda there.